Joseph Fitzmaurice and Matthew Chowdhury from the UK Home Office are here. They work within the modern slavery, or they specialise within modern slavery and the modern slavery statement side of things, and they're going to give us a real rundown on what the key facts are, statistics, a little bit more about transparency in supply chains and Section 54. So, Joseph, I'll let you open up, please. Welcome and thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much for having us, Shan. It's a really great opportunity to talk to you guys. So I'll just give a very quick introduction to what I do. I'll hand over to Matt for a very quick hello, and then we'll get cracking. So yeah, exactly as Shan was saying, we work within the modern slavery unit of the Home Office, and we work in what's called the sort of TISC team, which is transparency in supply chains. So we're really interested in supply chains and reporting on supply chains. And exactly as Sean was saying, non-slavery statements are a really massive part of our policy on this. So yeah, Joe Fitzmaurice, and yeah, really good to meet you guys. And I'll just pass over to Matt in case he wants to say anything.
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Joey. I'll quickly introduce myself as well. So, Matt Chowdhury here, also working in the Modern Slavery Unit in the Home Office. I primarily deal with kind of private sector business engagement. But in terms of the Modern Slavery Statement Registry itself, I'm the kind of, I guess, all call slash administrator for the service. So, if anyone on the call or any organization is having any technical issues or needs advice on how to submit their statements, then your email would probably land on my lap. So yeah, that's taking up my time. I'll hand over to Joey to kind of kick things off.
Great. Yeah, let's get started. And yeah, I think Matt's slightly underselling himself a little bit. He's probably the most knowledgeable in the government about modern slavery registry. So you've got a pretty good person on the call for this one. Cool. So I think I'm just going to sort of start off really with talking a little bit about what modern slavery is, what the Modern Slavery Act is, how this sort of affects you guys. I don't want to go into too much detail around this because I think that you guys are actually a relatively knowledgeable crowd. You probably already sort of know quite a bit about this, so there's no point in sort of spending too much of our time on this. But just to give a very brief overview, the Section 54 of the Modern Slavery Act is the sort of transparency section. This is the stuff that's really key for you guys, and this is what places sort of duty on business. And this is found within the 2015 Modern Slavery Act. There's a section of this act, um, and it's really, yeah, it's about transparency. It's about reporting on supply chains and what your business is, sort of the reach of your business. And it's about modern slavery. And so modern slavery is actually quite a broad term. It's like an umbrella term, and it captures some of the most extreme forms of human rights abuses. This sort of includes human trafficking, but it also includes slavery, servitude, and really key for you guys is forced labor, which is a really big thing for business and what we'll be sort of talking about quite a bit today. It's also worth sort of saying that as well as this being like an absolutely horrible crime on a personal level, it sort of hits individuals really hard, really nasty. There's also a massive economic side to this as well. So the average cost per modern slavery crime in the UK economy is second only to homicide. So this like a massive economic case this as well. It's not just a sort of absolutely awful human tragedy. So the ILO estimates there's about 40 million victims of modern slavery globally, and of these, 25 million are in forced labour. It's important to emphasise here this isn't a government statistic. Prevalence estimates are really notoriously slippery and hard to sort of accurately execute, but it gives basically the pitch that I'm trying to give. That modern slavery is this massive crime type, and it has very real consequences, and it's prevalent all over the world. In the UK, we have what's called the National Referral Mechanism, which is the sort of system of support that victims are identified in the UK go into. We sort of publish stats every quarter on the NRM. Unfortunately, we're just at the point where we're at the end of quarter 4, so we don't have a full year reporting. So I can only really talk about last year, but we're looking at around 10,000 referrals per victim, sorry, per year for victims in the UK. So this is, as I was saying, it's happening in the UK as well. This is, absolutely not something that's happening just in other parts of the world that we, have maybe limited access to. This is on our doorstep. Um, so it affects every country, it affects every sector. And I think this is actually something that's a bit of a misconception. I think sometimes people think that particular sectors the real hotspots, and there are hotspot sectors, but that it doesn't then apply to sort of less well-known sectors. This is just not the case. The sort of top 5 is like we normally think of as domestic work, construction, manufacturing, agriculture, and accommodation. But actually, this is so much deeper than this. It happens in all sectors, all businesses, very vulnerable. It also manifests in quite radically different ways. There's quite a bit of variation of how modern slavery actually exists. So we have sort of small cases of gang-run operations, maybe marijuana farms, this sort of thing. We then have, to the complete extreme end, state-sponsored modern slavery. Something like Xinjiang region is very known for this, really sort of extreme cases. We also have sort of varying types of modern slavery. So we see in DRC, in cobalt mines, there's lots of child and hazardous labor. And then we see with like Malaysian rubber gloves industry, there's a lot of charging migrant recruitment fees. And that's something that I want to talk about a little bit as well. So this is very varied. This is not something we can just sort of pin down to one particular crime type, one particular region, one particular sector. This is sort of prevalent across the board. So debt bondage accounts for about 50% of forced labour, we think, in the private economy, and much higher in certain sectors as well. And this is, I think, a lot of what I'm going to focus on, a lot of what you guys will be interested in as well. And so to sort of give a very brief summary of this, generally this happens when victims take out a loan or have been forced to take out a loan in order to get a job. So this can be recruitment fees, all sorts of different, like traveling to locations for interviews, this sort of stuff, as they take out money in order to actually obtain the job that they're looking for. And then they spend what is normally very little income they make on repaying the original debt. Often there's extortionate interest attached, and sort of recruitment fees can, I've sort of seen cases where it amounts to like years of salary, in what is, for the most part, not particularly pleasant work, very difficult, very low paid. And so they're attached to this organization. And this is a really common story of modern slavery found in supply chains. And the risks for this tend to be higher in the lower tiers. This is not going to be surprising for you guys, but there's less visibility, and you may not have like a direct contractual relationship, or I mean, if they are subcontractors of subcontractors, there's very little chance of having any sort of direct relationship there. It's also worth saying that this practice is not always illegal in the country that it's happening in. This is absolutely illegal in the UK and in many countries, but this can be performed in a sort of legal sense in that country. And that's one of the reasons why it's very difficult to sort of pin down sometimes. Clearly not something you want in your supply chain. This is like an absolutely massive human rights abuse. It's really an awful toll on humans. But just looking at the legality, sometimes it can sort of send you down the wrong direction. So I think it's sort of worth saying that like one of our goals is to really shift business culture and to sort of strategically tackle modern slavery, sort of taking a long-term targeted approach to address risks in supply chains, and sort of look at the greatest risks and the greatest leverage, and have a sort of approach that sort of maybe, rather than looking at every single part of supply chains individually, we're looking at taking a risk-based long-term approach to this. And I can talk about that a
And
little
tell
bit.
me, sorry, Joseph, can I jump in, Joseph? Because it's interesting
Absolutely.
what you're talking about with regards to debt bondage, and I'm sure many of the people attending will understand a little bit about that. But when we talk about, sorry, I'm getting carried away with myself here, so interrupting you here. But we talk about the fee that somebody may pay to find work. It's illegal, isn't it, in the UK for somebody to find work? And there's a principle of the employer must always pay. So it shouldn't be the worker that should be paying, but we find that practice still goes on, and people are paying to find a job in the UK, in particular with some of the schemes that we see being applied through the labour shortage. There's an increased risk of that, and we've had some discussions over the last few months on that on the SAMS calls. Oh, you're still there, Joe? I thought I lost you for a minute. So, sorry, I was getting carried away talking about bonded labour. So when you're talking about the the links. That's the links between different areas of modern slavery and links in the Modern Slavery Act. When we talk about what a modern slavery statement is and what it entails, what would you say are the core parts? What are the key points, the key pillars that a statement should have?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm definitely going to sort of touch upon this. But yeah, it's a really, really good question. So we have sort of 6 reporting topics that that I want to sort of talk a little bit about. I'm not going to go into great detail on them, but that's sort of great framework for the real key parts that the modern slavery should touch upon. And also these sort of work together as well. And I can talk a little bit about the sort of status and whether they're mandatory or not in a little bit. But it's not always, in order to have a good modern slavery statement, you need to come at it from multiple different angles. So a lot of these things are more commonly reported on than others. Some of them are a little bit harder to report on, but actually they sort of create a cohesive piece. But I might come back to that and touch upon that a little bit, but it's like a really good question and absolutely will be addressing it. But thank you so much. And please do feel free to stick your hand up or to jump in. That's totally fine. As long as you're happy, of course, being on recording. But yeah. So yeah, I'm going to just really touch upon the sort of headline requirements, and this is where we're going to go into some of those sort of key parts of a modern slavery statement. So it is worth saying, I think the experts on actually how to draft a modern slavery statement are going to be you guys in the room. So you're the ones who understand your supply chains. You know who your suppliers are. You sort of engage in business. You would have written far more on this than myself or Matt has. We've read plenty of modern slavery statements, but actual people in business working in their supply chains are the guys who sort of really know about what the risks of their business and how to address and perform modern slavery statements for their business. But I can definitely talk a little bit about like good practice and sort of reporting topics and this sort of thing. So I think one of the organizations to actually point to as a good example of a good modern slavery statement is M&S. So I think one of the things that's sort of good about M&S is they're not creating this tome. They're not creating like a massive document with dozens and dozens of pages. It's something like around 4, 5, 6 pages, but it's really high quality. They're really engaging in the reporting topics. They're actually putting work into looking into their supply chain. They are risk assessing. They've got sort of systems set up with key performance indicators. They've got really effective training regimes, this sort of thing. So they're really actually engaged and putting work in behind the scenes. It's not just about having like a lengthy statement where you're sort of talking about an extensive policy, but perhaps nothing else, a lot of fluff. And so these sort of like 6 reporting topics are I think the sort of backbone of what we want to see in statements. And they are the organizational structure, and the supply chains. We want to see sort of an assessment of modern slavery in those sorts of spaces, in the actual organization, in the actual supply chains. We also would like to see a policy in relation to slavery and human trafficking. It's really important, but it's not sufficient in itself. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Due diligence processes are great, really sort of analysing it. The risk assessment and management is so important. So we would love it if every single supplier, every single subcontractor could be like properly examined, but this just isn't reality. It's just not going to happen. This is not how things work. We understand that burden is astronomical for businesses, especially international businesses. So a risk-based approach is so important, being able to identify areas that are medium or high risk, and those are the ones we want you to focus on. And then, as I said, KPIs that sort of really measure effectiveness of the steps. So there's no point in having these steps if they don't go anywhere. So we want to see how effective they are year on year. Looking back at your previous year, what steps did you take? How do you assess them? Do you think they made a difference? So KPIs in that sense are brilliant. And then training systems on modern slavery for staff, for commercial, for all sorts of people who are engaging in your supply chain. So I want to say that right now, these are not mandatory reporting topics. These are suggestions. We highly encourage you to engage in these, but they're not a requirement. Although we have we're publicly committed to introducing mandatory reporting topics. And these aren't public yet. So the reporting topics that are coming out are not public. But what I can say is that we are looking for continuity. We don't want to increase burden on business. This is a really big part of all of our policy development. Is we don't want to have don't want to put additional or too much burden on you guys who are actually doing the reporting. And so we are looking to stick to suggested or to the reporting topics that you see, that I've spoken about, the current guidance, but really only deviating where our consultation has sort of suggested otherwise, where we've heard from people saying that we think differently. So although these are not mandatory, I really recommend everybody engaging with these because topics will become mandatory. They're just not public yet, so I can't tell you exactly what they are. So I think I spoke a little bit about risk-based approach, really important. And yeah, identifying where the sort of areas that you want to really focus on is really important. We understand there's not that much. It's only, we'd love more time, but it just isn't reality. So it's really important to have like a focused approach. And then very, very briefly, I think this is probably relatively straightforward, but I want to make sure it's out there as well. After completing all this drafting, it's really important that you get approval from your board of directors. So it really needs to be signed off by some management body, a director. I think with LLPs, that comes from members, but I'm not 100% sure about that, but I'm sure that's all in the guidance, so you can absolutely look on that. And then also, additionally, we expect organisations to upload their statement to the registry. Matt will talk about this in a little bit. And this, again, this is not currently mandatory, although I can say that this will be. So we will be looking to make, we will expect business to upload the registry, so it's really good to sort of engage with that now, come to grips with it. So when it is mandatory, it's not a sort of major surprise. I can see there's a hand up, so I'm going to stop there. I can't see who it is. If you've got a hand up, feel free to jump in.
Colleen, Theron, Colleen from Ardea.
Oh, thanks, Sean. Sorry, if I could just ask you one thing quickly, Joseph. So my voice is going. I'm Colleen Theron, and we work with loads of businesses reviewing and drafting their modern slavery statements and run training around this. And one of the things I wanted to ask you is why do you think we see such poor coverage of reporting across the 6 topics? I mean, do you think that it's because there's a lack of understanding, so it's a maturity level issue? So people haven't engaged enough to understand what effectiveness is in KPIs? Or do you think it's because it's not mandatory and there aren't particular penalties involved? I mean, we understand a director has to sign this, but which means the C-suite are having to think of this to some degree. But there's not that kind of penalty that you'd expect. And so do you think it's, one or the other or a combination of both as to why we see such poor reporting across the board? Thanks, Sean.
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I think you're absolutely right. I think there is a combination here. And I think making something mandatory, people then are engaging with it, and then there's definitely a realization about how helpful certain things are. I think there is also a lack of understanding. I think that some of I think it's a lot of what I've seen is that business does not realize actually how vulnerable they are in their lower tier supply chains to modern slavery. So we maybe look at our immediate suppliers, or we look at our actual staff, and we sort of see that everything looks okay, and there's a false sense of security. And I think one thing I would say is that there is definitely, in this room, there is going to be many businesses with modern slavery in their supply chain. And it is so prevalent that it exists in so many businesses. No sector is immune to this. And I think that message hasn't always come across to every business. So I think there absolutely is just a misunderstanding about how prevalent it is. And because of that, there's a lack of maybe engagement around some of the more difficult reporting topics. So of course, some of these are more difficult. We see in some of the worst statements, we sort of refer to as like policy statements rather than actual reporting statements. So you quite often get people who just will say, fairly long version of we don't agree with modern slavery. We expect to comply with all employment laws, and we expect our suppliers to do the same. And that's great, like fantastic. But that's the start. That should be top line, and then we expect you to go into saying why you're engaging, how you're engaging, what are you doing to ensure this actually is happening. That's a lot harder. It takes a lot more work, but that's where the real progress comes. So there's a very roundabout way of saying I think a little bit of both. But great question. And Matt, if you've got anything to add to that, feel free to jump in. All good. Perfect. Cool. So I'm going to very quickly jump over, because I think I've gone way over the amount that I wanted to. But I'm going to very quickly jump into a little bit of talk about culture, because I think this is actually perhaps one of the most important parts that I can talk about today. So a lot of what we're sort of spoken about in these sorts of conversations can be found in guidance or on government websites, can be found in legislation. It's helpful to have someone talk it through and ask questions, but the culture and the sort of expectation that we have around this and reporting within the spirit of the legislation is something that maybe doesn't come across perfectly without the sort of maybe more human engagement. And so I think it's really important that, exactly as we're talking about there with Colleen, that although you may be able to comply with the reporting requirement by putting out a bit of a shoddy statement that hits one of the reporting requirements, you meet your obligation to report on section 54, but you're not really engaging with it fully. I think it's so important that we look beyond just hitting a requirement. Even when some of this stuff becomes mandatory and there's a sort of higher bar in order to meet your reporting requirement, we would still expect people to be genuinely engaging with this. I mean, this is real people. It's an awful crime. There's, as I say, many businesses in this call that are going to have modern slavery in their supply chains somewhere. And it's so important to actually go beyond what is just sort of maybe the bare minimum to actually properly engage in this. And I think that I realized that in some ways I'm speaking to the choir, because being part of this group suggests that there is genuine engagement already in this. But your reach goes beyond just your business. It's going to other businesses, to sort of competitors, to colleagues. So absolutely would really encourage you to sort of like champion this in your place of work and outside it. It's such an important initiative. And I think that some of this culture as well extends to people outside of business. So one thing that we see is it's actually, we do not consider it a bad thing if a business identifies modern slavery in their supply chain. And I think that surprises people sometimes, because this seems like the worst possible outcome you could have for a modern slavery statement, finding actual modern slavery in your supply chain. But I think if you go in with the expectation this is likely here and it is likely in your supply chain, the important part is identifying it and then looking to remedy it, rather than just trying to have a clean statement where, look, zero chance of modern slavery across the board. We're a clean company. We're perfect. We've met the reporting requirement and we look great. This is complicated though, because I understand that the general public may not have this same perception. And I think that's part of this culture that we in the Home Office and in sort of policy teams are looking to change as well. We're looking to change the culture in business to be more transparent, and we're also looking to change the understanding of how modern slavery works in supply chains through in the general public, that identifying modern slavery is actually good transparency. It's actually engaging with this in a proper way, looking at high risk areas, identifying sort of blind spots within statements, and then looking to remedy it. And the last thing I'll just say on this is that if you do find modern slavery in your supply chain, it's a temptation to just cut off that part of your supply chain, never engage with it again, have nothing to do with it, clean up your sort of organization, and then feels like a success. But actually, would really encourage you to engage with suppliers, look to change practice. This is obviously a case by case thing, and a lot of the time this is maybe not appropriate, but we would really encourage you to sort of actually look to talk to these suppliers, look to change practice. You have so much influence being a contractor, that you really have that ability to actually make a difference to people in this space. And I think that's something that is part of this culture. It's part of the engaging in the spirit of Section 54 that maybe isn't actually in the text of Section 54. So on that, I think I'll leave it. There's so much more to talk about, but I'm really conscious of time. I'll
No,
pass over to Shan, just in case anything
yeah,
you want to say, and then
no,
I'll
it's
jump
fine.
to Matt.
No, Joe, that was, thank you very much. A real insight, and actually, what you've put is um, a lot of meat on the bones of what's written down. You know, what we can read and what we can understand, or take guidance on. But actually, hearing you say it, and you know, the big thing for me is about, well, a couple of things I'll pick up on here is that, you know, your obligations versus, you know, engagement. So actually, um, the difference, the spirit of the legislation, as you said, the words you described, you know, what it's all about. It's something maybe I can ask Gordon as well if he could maybe help out here, you know, because because we know we have legislation in Scotland as well, which has a little bit adds a little bit extra onto this, Gordon. But can you, you know, Joseph, you mentioned about what may become or will become mandatory. So this is about the legislation changing. Do you have any timelines or any indications about when or what that when that will happen?
Yeah, so I'm afraid I can't give particularly concrete timelines on this. What I can say is that it requires legislation. And so this is really down to like parliamentary timetabling. But unfortunately, I can't give anything more than that.
It's parliamentary timetable and sounds like the politicians have to decide and get it passed through Parliament first. Gordon, do you see any changes in the Scottish Human Trafficking Exploitation Act that could have some impact to the Scottish-based businesses that are on here?
Yeah, I don't think so, Shan. So obviously the corporate area is generally reserved kind of thing, and the Scottish government, you know, participated in the consultation to some extent a couple of years ago, and were kind of fully supportive of the proposals that the Home Office came back with, kind of thing, in their consultation response. So a fairly well aligned kind of between Home Office and Scottish Government in terms of response to, you know, and obligations or responsibilities on business kind of thing. But I definitely emphasise that point of, you know, you can kind of meet the letter of the legislation without really meeting the spirit of the transparency supply chain kind of process. And I think it's probably more the spirit that delivers, you know, maximum results rather than, you know, ticking the boxes kind of thing. So yeah, definitely, you know, support that view.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you very much. I suppose with Shane, I can see a question from Shane Tyler, and I'll just go to Shane in a minute, and probably a good time to kind of announce some of the intentions that we have with Scotland Against Modern Slavery, and for our members, the business members that are on. Joe had mentioned about the registry in your statement and uploading the registry, which isn't actually currently isn't obligation to upload your statement onto the registry. But I think what we'd like to work towards over a set timeline, and I'll work with Gordon on this on how we do this. But for the members of SAMS, is to get every member of SAMS have their statement uploaded onto the registry, and we would like to give a timeline on that. We'll work on what that timeline is once we work on the meat and the bones. But this is a start to getting there, and I think for us, for representing Scotland Against Modern Slavery and the work that we're doing in conjunction with all the partners, I think it'd be a huge statement to say that we have all of our members on there. The majority of the business that are on SAMS, all the business that are on SAMS have their statements. They understand their statements, the living, breathing nature of the document, and that they're uploaded onto the registry. Before we move on to Matt and go into a little bit more detail about the registry, I think we'll take the question then from Shane. Shane Tyler.
Hi, thank you, Joseph. Thanks, Shan. Just a couple of things that you mentioned. One, really great that you are wanting to align the statements to actual practical activity. Within our organisation, we do an immense amount of work in our supply chains actually tackling issues. But one of the things we're really struggling with on the ground is that we practice ethics 101. We walk towards any problem, but we're finding it more and more difficult of guilt by allegation. So as somebody is accused of something, then it's all over the press and it's negative, and therefore we're not able to walk towards it because customers or other issues and walking away. So that's one of the challenges, and how do we square that circle? And the second thing that you mentioned was about payment for work. But very often what we're finding as well with payment for work is it's happening in country, and that when we're then reporting that to the UK authorities, there's absolutely no ability to resolve it on our behalf. So we know it's going on and nothing's happening about it. And I didn't know whether there was anything that's on those two statements you could to give feedback.
Yeah, sure. So am I off mute? Yes, cool. So they're two really good questions and really tricky ones, to be honest, to answer. What I would say is that we do have guidance online that talks about what to do if you identify or really strongly suspect modern slavery abroad. But what it will tell you is it will tell you that this should be tailored to the local circumstances, essentially. It promotes the idea of working with local NGOs, industry bodies, trade unions, this sort of thing. It is just, it's such a complex question. It's such a complex scenario that it is case by case. But yeah, I think though I really strongly recommend looking at the guidance. And then you're definitely right in that you know, if you're able to access sort of organizations in that space, they can help you there. But it is a difficult one. In terms of your first question, with sort of guilt by association, I think this is exactly what I was talking about with changing the culture in more broadly, not just focusing on business with this, but trying to change public perception. And to be honest, that is incredibly hard. And I think the way that we can do this, and I totally understand that this is difficult. I think the way that we can do this is by having transparent reporting across the board with business, normalizing this sort of reporting. And that is maybe not what you want to hear, because it's sort of, it can be seen as sort of putting the onus on business. But I think the more that we implement transparency legislation, the more that we shore up this legislation, the more that we fine tune it, the better the reporting that comes from you guys, the better the sort of change will be in perception in the general public. But I very much sympathise with it. It is a difficulty when it comes to reporting with how it is perceived and misunderstood, I think, because the general public can misunderstand high quality reporting for poor practice. And I think that's what I'd say to it. But it's a tricky issue for sure. But it's one we're aware of. That's what I would say. We're aware of it and we're looking at it. It's definitely something that we think about.
Hard questions, Joseph. Hard questions. Hard crowds. Hard crowd. Thank you very much for that. Okay, so now the registry, and I think we've got the specialist, the most specialised person in the whole of the UK that can actually talk about modern slavery registries. Matt Chowdhury, thank you very much. So could you tell us a little bit about what the registry is? Why are we talking about it? What does it mean?
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Shan. And extremely conscious of time. So I'll see if I can condense everything into 10, 15 minutes to give enough time for questions. But please do shout if anyone does have any questions while I roll through. Yeah, where do I start? So just a bit of a background before I delve into the registry itself, give a bit of a walkthrough of its features. Um, just like to mention that the service launched on the 11th of March, 2021, and this was followed by a huge letter campaign. We wrote to around 16,000 UK organisations, which the Home Office identified as in scope of Section 54 of the Act. All of the letters were addressed to the CEO, kind of inviting them to publish their most recent statement onto the registry. And this was definitely to kind of demonstrate compliance and kind of strongly encourage use of the registry. So I'm sure a few of you on the call received one of our letters. So apologies if you're way ahead of the curve and have already submitted the statement. Hopefully you'll find this next portion of the meeting useful. But as kind of Shan and Joey mentioned, the Modern Slavery Statement Registry is currently voluntary. There is no requirement to use our service. But as Shan mentioned, which was music to my ears, it's an intention to get all SAM members' statements on the registry. So that's great to hear. But right now, the only legislative requirement is to publish on your website if you have one. The UK government does kind of strongly encourage organisations to submit at least their most recent statement onto the registry. And thus far, we've seen a kind of very strong appetite from organisations to share the positive action they have taken to prevent modern slavery in their supply chains. Currently, there's over 7,000 modern slavery statements on the registry, which has covered around 23,000 organisations, which is fantastic for voluntary service. As Joey mentioned, in the future, it will be kind of mandatory for all organisations in scope of the Act to publish their statement to the service by a specific reporting deadline, being the 30th of September. But these measures require legislative change and will be brought into effect when parliamentary time kind of allows for. For the government, the kind of ultimate goal of the registry is to bring all statements together in one place. This was a key recommendation of the independent review of the Modern Slavery Act, which was published in 2019, because at the time, publicly, there were kind of two statement registries, TISC report and Modern Slavery Registry, which some of you may have engaged with. But stakeholders, the vast majority of stakeholders, kind of found this confusing. Why were there two modern slavery statement registries? So one of their key recommendations was to create a kind of centralized service to bring greater clarity and consistency in the future. In the longer term, the registry will be a key tool for the government to kind of monitor and drive compliance with Section 54. As the registry will be a requirement in the future, it will kind of allow us to more easily identify who is not publishing modern slavery statements. And I guess more widely outside of government, another goal of the registry is to kind of enable interested groups such as investors, NGOs, to kind of scrutinize the action organizations are taking and kind of monitoring that progress across sectors over time. And all of the data in the registry is publicly available and can be downloaded in a Excel format for kind of that big data analysis as well. So I'll quickly share my screen and show off the registry. Or you can view statements, which can be done either by viewing a summary of that statement, which will include a URL to the full statement on that organization's website, or as I mentioned, by kind of downloading all of the information in the registry. I'll quickly run through each element, but I'll start with the process for submitting a statement. So if you don't have an account, it's a simple process just by clicking on create an account or sign in. And then waiting for the page to load. And then clicking create an account at the bottom. And very simple process, just inputting your details and email address here. I've already got an account, so I'll sign in. So as I mentioned, we wrote to 16,000 organizations, kind of encouraging them to publish their statements. And in those letters, there were kind of unique codes, an organization reference and a security code, which that organization would use to register their organizations. As this was almost a year ago now, all of the security codes have expired. There was a set time limit in order to register this way. So the only way to register right now, if you haven't already done so, is to do it manually. Very easy process, and any organization can register onto the service, whether they are in scope of Section 54 or not. And it's also worth pointing out that an individual can register as many organizations as they wish to one account and manage them separately. Or if they have a group statement, so one statement that is representative of the whole organization, kind of which includes a number of entities, subsidiaries, then it's only necessary to register the parent organization, as there will be an opportunity during the submission process to kind of list those organizations covered. So if I wanted to register manually after creating an account from the landing page, I'll click on register an organization at the bottom. No to did I receive a letter, and we're all private sector organizations, so I'll click on private. And it's a simple case of just finding your organization. So I'll type Scotland. Hopefully some organizations come up. Perfect. So it's found 400 of a possible 22,508 results, which is perfect. I'll just pick a random one. Bear Scotland Limited. That sounds interesting. And I just need to confirm that this is my organization.
They're also members of SAMS, Matt.
Are they?
Coincidence? What a coincidence. Keep going.
Perfect. Well, I guess I'm duplicating effort then. Make sure this is my registered address. Please do shout if it's not your registered address. I'll sort that out later. Click confirm. This is a test site which I'm using. I don't want to use the live service just in case I delete anything. But in a normal circumstance, an automatic letter will be sent to that registered address with a PIN. But just because this is a test site, the PIN has been sent to my email address. But it says that that PIN will arrive within 7 days, and you'll have 30 calendar days to use that PIN to register. I've already got a number of organizations registered, so I'll just pick any random one. Department of Awesome, which could possibly be another SAMS member.
Can you tell me which cabinet secretary or cabinet minister heads up the Department of Awesome? No, no comment.
That's a secret, Shan. So this leads to kind of the first step for submitting a statement. And this is a very important step, which is to choose which kind of financial year statement you'll like to submit to. And you'll see there's 3 options, so from 2020 to 2022. And I must stress that it's possible for an organization to submit their statement in the wrong year. And this is something I've encountered quite commonly. And this is because the registry expects statements to be submitted in the year that they were due to be published, not the year end of your financial period, which organizations tend to use. So there is guidance on this page. You'll need to click the show hide bit here, add your statement to the correct calendar year. And it kind of details that you can calculate the calendar year by kind of adding 6 months to the date of your financial year end. So if your period falls in the first half of the year, so the 1st of January to the 30th of June, you submit in the same calendar year. If it falls in the second half of the year, so 1st of July to 31st of September, then you submit your statement in the next calendar year. There won't be any need to calculate this once the registry is mandatory and we have a single reporting deadline of the 30th of September. Everyone will submit to that year. But for now, kind of please do understand where your statement should be. Otherwise, you'll be getting a stern email from me to put it in the right year, and you don't want that. So I'll go through the submission process very quickly because we have 9 minutes, so I'm racing against the clock. But I'll choose 2021. So there'll be some basic information for the submitter, just to inform them that the information is will be made public, and just encouraging them to answer all of the questions with as much detail as possible. Oh, and also, before you kind of go through the process of submitting your statement, you can read all of the required and optional questions to help you prepare your submission. So this will take you to another page where you can kind of print out all of the questions. And if you need to collaborate with other teams, then you can do that before you actually formally submit your statement.
So, Matt, once you go through that part of it, I know there's some common issues you mentioned about the financial year period. Any other issues that you've seen that are quite common that we could try and avoid as we go forward?
Yeah, definitely. So there's a few things during the actual process which I'll emphasize. One of them being the financial year period. So that's another common issue which I'll explain in a minute. But you kind of preempted me there. But yeah, I'll go through that. So yeah, so as you can see, the landing submission page is kind of split into two parts, comprising of 11 sections. The first section has to be completed at a minimum in order for the statement to be submitted and viewable on the registry. The second section is completely optional and is available if an organization wants to provide a kind of a fuller summary of their full statement. I guess it's worth mentioning when we conducted user research during the development of the registry, kind of with those interested in analyzing huge swaths of data, they wanted the data to be presented in a way which kind of enables monitoring and compliance. So the purpose of asking the optional questions is to kind of make it easier to capture that comparable data on the steps that organizations are taking to tackle modern slavery. And kind of ease of use was definitely at the forefront of the development of the registry. So going through the process should be fairly self-explanatory, but I'll go through as much of the sections as possible. So yeah, I'll go through the first section. So whether your statement covers a single organization or a group, if it is a group of organizations, then it's just simply clicking on that and then save and continue. And then you'll need to kind of input all of those organizations which are included within your statement. So again, I'll just choose Scotland, and hopefully some organizations should crop up. So I'll just choose the first one. I doubt this is part of Awesome of Department's statement, but Advanced Construction Scotland Limited. It's just a case of clicking include, and then a little pop-up will appear to say that one organization has been included, and you can include as many organizations as possible. Once you have included all of your entities, then you click continue, review that these are all of the organizations you want to include, and then clicking continue. And for the second section, you would need to provide a URL to your statement. So I'll just choose Google for now, if I can spell it. And yeah, so this is, I guess, where we come to the next kind of, I guess, sticky period in the submission process. So what your period statement covers. So I'll do the most common fiscal period. So the 31st of March 2020 to the 1st of April 2021. And remember, if the date end is before the 30th of June, it's in the current year. After the 1st of July, it's in the next year.
Matt, just sorry, conscious we've got a few minutes left, so I'll probably just cut in there if that's okay. So it seems actually that sorry, on you go.
Oh, sorry, Shan. I'll quickly explain this. The rest of the questions should be self-explanatory, but yeah, I'm available 24/7. So if anyone has any questions, then please do come to me. But I'll quickly, in a minute, go through what date was your statement approved by the board or equivalent management body, unless you wanted to quickly come in now.
No, it's fine. Go for it. That sounds like one of the sticky points of doing it, so go for it.
Yeah, perfect. So this page is asking for kind of who signed off the statement. And I'll just put in my name quickly. And the next question is around the board or equivalent management body. And I guess I'm sure you all know that a modern slavery statement is retrospective. So each year your organization needs to assess whether your, I guess, organization meets the criteria for the preceding financial year. If so, then you publish a modern slavery statement. Simple. With that in mind, a management body should not sign off a statement for a period that hasn't ended, as this kind of goes against the spirit of the legislation. So for example, because my period end date was the 1st of April 2021, if I was to put I guess the 2nd of February, for example, 2021, then it will say the approved date must be after your financial year end. And this has caused a few issues for organizations because they've sought approval before the end of their period. That's not what the legislation kind of describes. It should be afterwards. So that's just something to bear in mind. But I'll stop there because we have 3 minutes. But yeah, as I mentioned, more than happy to kind of do run-throughs with organizations separately if they want to.
Which is great. So we have the specialist on hand to help us through the next part of the journey. I think the key thing I've picked up, well, I understand, is that whilst this may be not a mandatory requirement legally currently, it will be. It looks like it will become mandatory. And I think what we would like to do, or like to be ahead of the game, is a lot of the businesses on here. That's why they're members of SAMS, because they're a bit more forward thinking. So, being one step ahead, and it was great to see Elise from Glasgow University just commit to getting their statement on the registry and going through the process, which is fantastic news. So it's already helped what you've said. I think what we'll do, we've got a couple of minutes. Is there any questions that anybody has in the short term that could be answered fairly rapidly by Matt, Joe, Gordon? And if anyone's got a hand, just raise them. If not, I'll keep talking before we finish. No one's coming. So actually, well, what I'll do is then, like I said earlier on, our aim is to have the members of SAMS all uploaded, compliant, ready to roll. We'll be coming out to all the members over the course of the next 2 to 3 weeks to get your thoughts on it, get your views on it. We'll work on a timeline. We'll work on some media presence as well. I think it's really important that if we're doing something as important as Scotland Against Modern Slavery, it's just not a tick box exercise, to use a phrase that was coined earlier on, that we actually live and breathe what we're doing. So the businesses that are on, that are members, we would like to have a bit of a PR coup, I think, to step it up. I think some of the key points I've taken from Joe and Matt is that, the spirit of the legislation, and this is legislation that crosses all political boundaries. It has no, I mean, we're on here showing that the UK and Scottish government are more than happy to collaborate. They don't collaborate in a lot of things, guys, but this is one thing they are collaborating on, which is delightful. Gordon, I'm sorry, I had to stick that one in there. But no, through collaboration, which is really important for us. So we'll come out to you and we'll speak to you, from the SAMS team at Brightwork, and we'll have a discussion. And Matt has made himself freely available to talk through and support businesses to get through that part of the next part of their journey. Finally, I'd just like to thank everyone for taking part. It's been a interesting session, a lot of information. I have recorded it. I will get that uploaded. I didn't stop recording for the questions because the questions, just as they came, we answered them. So we'll have a recording to disseminate. I know this not might fall under your part of your business, if that makes sense. There may be legal counsel or any other individuals in the business that will find this of great interest. Right, it's 3 o'clock. We've all got calls. We've all got jobs to do. I'd like to thank you all for attending, and I'll keep you posted on the next SAMS Roundtable and some of the initiatives that we'll be delivering. Thank you very much, Joseph, Matt, and Gordon.
Thank you.
Thanks for
Thank
having
you.
us.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Cheers.